Hi, everybody. Welcome to the live lesson. Today, we are going to be doing a recap lesson on all of your exam revision. I had a look at the comment section on our community page, and a lot of us have indicated that we want some help with female reproductive system. So we're going to do that. And most of us also said the eye and the ear. So we're going to focus our attention on that. I'm also hoping that that then means that we have genetics on lock, because I sometimes think that we oversimplify that section and we don't prepare enough for it. So let's hope that we've got that on lock. Okay. I'm just going to wait for a couple more people to join the lesson. And as we do that, and while we wait, let's just do a couple of like admin pieces to get out of the way. So, of course, if you are a member, don't forget that you can get access to the cheat sheet study guide. I actually have, don't get excited, I actually have my very own hard copy version of it. No, there isn't a hard copy version for you to get. This is my own personal private one, but this is what it would look like in real life. But you can, remember, get a copy of this if you are a Rescue Me member, or if you're not a Rescue Me member, then you can purchase this on missangler.co.za. Remember, we've got lots of other subjects. We've got physics, accounting, mathematics, all those good things. Very useful. I'm actually going to refer to it in today's lesson as well, so that you can see how you can use it if you do have a copy, how you're going to use it to study, and how it's going to make studying really easy. Something else that I want to cover quickly as well is that, of course, if you have any questions for me on any of the topics that we're going to do today, then you can pop it in the chat, and I can see the chat the whole way through our lesson. So you can let me know if you want me to clarify anything. So I think let's divide our time fairly equally between the three topics. We have roughly an hour together today to recap this. So let's do about 20 minutes on each of these topics: the eye, the ear, and the female reproductive system. I think I'm going to start with the female reproductive system, because I think that's what many of us really want. And then we can see if we've got any questions as well. So I am just going to quickly swap over to my screen so that you can see me, and I'm just in the bottom corner here now. Okay, so this is my revision note that I'm making. I know I've got some diagrams there. Don't worry, they're going to get much bigger sooner. And so what I think I want to start off with is I want to clarify the ovarian and the uterine cycle, and then we'll do the hormones. So I'm going to zoom in nice and close to this diagram here of our ovary, right? And when we're done, we would have made a whole summary note on this page. So you are looking at a cross section through the ovary, and we are going to go through the ovarian cycle. Now, if you do have a cheat sheet, and if you are a member and you've then accessed it, then you should be able to find this exact picture. Actually, it's on page 100 and not 100, it's on page 33. And everything that I'm pretty much going to cover now is in the book. And so let's make sure that we know what's going on inside of our ovary. So first of all, our ovarian cycle is going to begin with these structures here, which are follicles. Now, these are what we would specifically call a primary follicle, and they have grown under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. So as follicle stimulating hormone goes up, these follicles grow and get bigger. Now, that follicle gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes this really large follicle over here called a Graafian follicle. And a couple of things happen here now with this follicle. So number one, the Graafian follicle is going to give off a hormone. So I'm going to put an arrow going out of this, which would be the hormone estrogen. And that hormone is responsible for repairing and let's say maintaining. I like the word maintain. The endometrium. Endometrium. There we go. Had a little brain wobble there. Couldn't remember how to spell endometrium. So that is the hormone that is coming out of the Graafian follicle as it gets bigger, right? But now we need to get the follicle to burst, right? And we need to release that follicle, or should I say that egg? And that's something I didn't point out in the picture. That's one last thing. Is if you have a look at my diagram, if I go really close and I zoom in a bit more, do you see this yellow structure? It's inside all of the stages of the follicle developing. That is the oocyte or the egg, okay? It's inside the Graafian follicle. Now, our estrogen is going to repair and maintain the endometrium. So basically, while we are developing an egg, we're preparing the endometrium for implantation, so for pregnancy, right? So we need to do two things at the same time. We need to make an egg, and then we need to give it somewhere to go. Now, we've made the egg, we've matured the egg. Now we want to release it. So that then brings me to the process that is happening over here, which is called ovulation. Now, what causes ovulation? Well, it's a combination of FSH and LH, or luteinizing hormone. So it's these two hormones at the same time. And they essentially increase, so they go up a little bit on roughly, if we remember correctly, on day 14. Right? On day 14, these two hormones do a little peak in the graph, and what then happens is the Graafian follicle bursts and it releases the oocyte or the ovum, right? Now, when we are left with the empty Graafian follicle, right? So the egg has left, we are left with this yellow structure over here. That is called the corpus. And I never remembered how to spell luteum. It's always that sneaky E. Luteum. There we go. The corpus luteum. Now, FSH is not needed anymore. So we actually lose the follicle stimulating hormone because you don't need to make another follicle if you're going to fall pregnant, right? You want to be pregnant one baby at a time. So one follicle at a time. So FSH is going to go down. You're left with the corpus luteum. Now, the corpus luteum, it's maintained and created by LH. So I'm actually going to just add LH over here on the side. And this hormone is acting upon the corpus luteum. It's maintaining the corpus luteum. Okay. Why do we want to maintain the corpus luteum? There's nothing inside of it. Well, you should know that the corpus luteum secretes out. So that's why I'm putting my arrow going outwards. Progesterone. This is the pregnancy hormone. So this is the hormone that is responsible for maintaining the pregnancy that you currently have. And so progesterone, its effect on the uterus, right, is to make it more glandular and vascular. Okay. Glandular means more glands, vascular means more blood vessels. What is that? The uterus, specifically the endometrium. So when I say more glandular and vascular, I'm referring to the endometrium. Okay. And that, everyone, in a nutshell, is the ovarian cycle. I have very briefly mentioned the hormones, but I'm going to, don't worry, go into much more detail of how they interact with one another and how they work. So before we ask me lots of questions about the hormones, I just need you to be very comfortable with the structures and what the structures produce or what hormones they respond to. Right? That's what I need you to know for now. And in an exam, you should be able to identify all of these major structures, meaning you will need to be able to, if I zoom out a little bit, you will need to know what a follicle is, the Graafian follicle, you will need to know what ovulation looks like, you will need to know what the corpus luteum looks like, okay? So there are four main things you should be able to identify out of this picture, right, in any exam. Sometimes it's missing pieces as well, so you won't always have a reference to compare. You must know what you are looking at. So now that we have this general structure, if there is any questions about the structures, please put them in the chat and I will revert back to them and I'll integrate them into the next component. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the hormones because that's often our most challenging section, right? So we know this stuff. This stuff is easy. It's the hormone section that we struggle with. So I'm going to zoom out. So as you can see, there's a little summary note forming. And I'm going to go into this particular graph that I have found. I quite like this one. It's great, okay? I think I actually have a very similar one in my menstrual cycle video. And of course, you can watch me teach the menstrual cycle right from the beginning in my playlist for grade 12s as well. So let's get into the hormones. So this particular graph has four things happening. First of all, it has all of the hormones that are coming from the pituitary gland, which is this one up here. In other words, these are the hormones that are secreted by the pituitary gland. This over here is what is happening inside the ovary. In other words, what's happening to the follicle over time. And then the next one is the ovarian hormones. So these are all of the hormones that are either coming out of the Graafian follicle or this is coming out of the corpus luteum. Because remember, the corpus luteum and the follicle were once the same structure. They've just changed shape and function, so they must change name. And then the last bit down here is the uterine cycle, and this is the layers or how thick the endometrium is. So this is endometrium thickness. Okay. Now, I want to pause here and say that if you do have the cheat sheet on page 34, you'll be able to find everything that I'm going to cover now with this diagram in step-by-step bullet point, which is really useful to study from because what I tell you to do is I tell you what to look for and I also tell you how you give a reason. So for example, if they ever ask you in an exam, well, how did you know that was LH? Or how did you know that was estrogen? I also tell you what to provide as an answer in the exam as well. And so many times I get questions on how do I use the cheat sheet? Besides it being a study tool, in other words, you can study directly from it, it is also a place where you can find the perfect answer for your exam questions. So let's get into how do we identify different hormones, starting off with the pituitary hormones. So I'm going to zoom in just a smidgen. Oh, actually, we're maximum. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go. Just a little bit so we can get a bit closer. Okay. So the hormones are not labeled here. So how do we know which one is which? Okay. And that's what I want to teach you today. And then I'll tell you how they interact with one another. So step one, how do we identify the hormones in a graph that has no labels? So number one, when we are looking for some hormones, some are easier to spot than others. So I'm going to start off with the easiest hormone to spot, which is this guy right here. Do you see that it has one single peak? Okay. And if this is the middle of our graph, because remember, this is day 14, right? That means this is ovulation day. What hormone is that? What hormone peaks and causes ovulation and causes the corpus luteum to fall? LH, luteinizing hormone. So it's one of the easiest hormones to identify because it only peaks once on day 14. Now, if we look at the blue line, what hormone is that? Well, number one, we know it's a pituitary hormone. It means it comes from the pituitary gland and it works with LH. Now, it's actually got two peaks. So you've got to look carefully for the second one. The first one in the middle here that we can spot, that's easy, right? But I actually want you to notice this portion of the line is a peak. It is above, right? It's above the lowest point on the blue line graph. That, everybody, is follicle stimulating hormone. Now, in this graph, it is easy or easier to identify FSH because LH is right next to it and you know they work together, but it gets harder when all four hormones are on the same axes. So what am I looking for to know that that's FSH and not another hormone? Because you'll see there's two other hormones we haven't done yet, and how do I tell the difference? Well, FSH has two things. One, it has two peaks. So it peaks twice. Okay. There is another hormone that does that, but I'll tell you the difference now. It has two peaks. So already we know it's not we know it's not LH. Okay. It has two peaks and it peaks first. So if it's got two peaks, it is the first hormone to peak. Okay. So it is the first to peak. So if you put all the hormones on one graph, it will be the first line going up, okay? Now we go a little bit lower and we go to the ovarian hormones, or the hormones, as I mentioned, that are coming out of the Graafian follicle or the corpus luteum. Now I need you to keep your eyes peeled here. I want you to look up at the other hormones and look down at what we're dealing with here so you can see a comparison. And I'm going to start with the pink line on this one because it's going to help you know the difference between FSH and this hormone. So the pink line, right? It has two peaks. It's got a peak here and a peak here. Now, I just told you that FSH has two peaks, right? So now I've got another hormone that's got two peaks. What are we going to do to tell the difference between the two? What am I going to look for? And also, what is this hormone? Okay. So first of all, what is this hormone and how do I know that? This hormone that's peaking twice is estrogen, right? Estrogen peaks twice. Why does it peak twice? The first peak, which is this one that's coming up over here, is because if you look just above, the Graafian follicle is growing and getting bigger. And I'm just going to go here like that. I'm going to cut the ovulation one in half. And remember what comes out of the Graafian follicle. We did this earlier. Estrogen comes out of the Graafian follicle. So that means its amount, its percentage is going to go up because the bigger the follicle gets, the more estrogen it makes, right? Now, ovulation occurs. And after ovulation, you'll notice that estrogen takes a dip, which is true because why? The Graafian follicle is not there anymore. It's become the corpus luteum. But then you'll notice there's another peak, and you've got to look carefully down at what day this is. And this is day 21. Day 21 is essentially the end of the fertile window. Now, not all windows are this long. In actual fact, they're probably a little bit shorter than this. But from day 14 to day 21, there are 7 days. You have roughly 7 days to fertilize and implant. Okay, that's the goal. If that hasn't happened, we need to get rid of the egg. We need to get rid of the endometrium. And the only way to get rid of the endometrium is to cause estrogen to peak once more. And when it peaks, you see how it goes down? That dip, we want to get it as low as possible. When it gets to that very low point that I'm drawing over now, it signals that the endometrium must fall away and a period must begin. Now, this is where I think everybody struggles. And I think this is the problem many people have with this topic. They don't understand that negative feedback of how estrogen influences the endometrium. And now we're going to get to progesterone, how it does it as well. I'm still going to clarify a little bit more, so don't worry. Now, estrogen has two peaks. And when does it peak? Well, it peaks shortly after FSH. If you let your eyes go back up the graph, you can see here that it's going to peak shortly after. And it peaks twice. So that's what you're looking for. 2 peaks, and the first peak of the 2 is always shortly after FSH has peaked. So that's how you know that's estrogen. Now, when we look at this blue line here, there's only one hormone we haven't talked about just yet. And so hopefully you've, through the process of deduction, you figured out that this is progesterone. But how do I know it's progesterone, right? Well, first of all, progesterone only really peaks once, and it is around day 21. Why? Because remember, let's look up the diagram. Let's look up the graph. You can see here the corpus luteum, right? And it's getting bigger, and should I say also it's being maintained by LH. It's going to start secreting progesterone, which is why this amount goes up after ovulation, because it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's secreting progesterone. Then we get to day 21. And at day 21, the body basically makes a decision. Are we pregnant? Are we implanted? Yes or no? No. All right, we're not. Then step 1, we're going to let the corpus luteum shrink down and get smaller and smaller, which means it will make less and less progesterone, hence the progesterone level dropping. The progesterone level drops along with the estrogen level dropping, and this leads to menstruation. And so if you look to the very final layer, which is the thickness of the endometrium level, the bottom here, you will, of course, see how this correlates. Because if you think about it, and I'm just going to draw a dotted line roughly through my hormones going from the bottom up. Okay, there we go. What you'll see here is while we are making an egg, so while we're making a follicle, you are actually losing the lining of your uterus, which is true. And remember, the cycle doesn't start the day a woman stops bleeding. It's the first day she bleeds. Okay, that's day 1. After 7 days, she stops bleeding. And for the next 7 days, she's making a follicle. And look how that lining is getting thicker and thicker because the Graafian follicle is getting bigger. It's making more estrogen. Once we get to day 14, ovulation happens. And ovulation must happen for 2 reasons. 1, to release the egg. And 2, to allow the corpus luteum to form so we can make progesterone. Because progesterone, look how thick and also well-maintained it is. In other words, consistent it is. Progesterone does that. It makes it glandular. It makes it vascular. And when we get to day 21, that's the decision day. The body goes, are we pregnant? Yes or no? No, we're not, or yes, we are. And so that if we are not, 7 days later, the hormone levels have dropped so low that it triggers a loss of the lining. And what do? We automatically go from 28 all the way back to day 0 on the same day, which I know confuses people, but you've got to stick with me here, right? Because you've got to think of it like this. The last day of your menstrual cycle becomes the first day of your menstrual cycle, the moment your period starts. Okay, so it's kind of like your hormone levels are going down, 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 and when they reach their lowest point, that triggers the loss of the lining. And as soon as a period begins, we start again at day 0, and then we start all over, building a follicle and building the lining. So to summarize, and the most important part that, again, I think people really struggle with, the negative feedback and which hormone is doing what. This will be my last point about the female hormones. So if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the chat soon. My last point is who's working with who. So I've just moved this picture over to the side. I might move it just a little bit more. Who's working with who? Who's interacting with who? So let's not forget we have FSH and we have luteinizing hormone. Those are my, what do we call them? Those are my pituitary gland hormones, right? I'm just seeing here, my screen is not refreshing, so I'm going to wait for it to refresh before I continue. So remember, we've got 4 hormones, right? And those 4 hormones, they are the ones that are responsible for maintaining our lining and maintaining our follicle, right? So follicle stimulating hormone creates the follicle. Luteinizing hormone releases the egg from the follicle. Estrogen comes out of the Graafian follicle. And once it comes out of the Graafian follicle, it is going to then, Graafian follicle, I've lost my point. Then the estrogen is going to maintain the endometrium. After ovulation, our Graafian follicle becomes the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum secretes progesterone, which takes over, maintains the endometrium, all that good stuff. Okay. Now, I just want to see if oh, there we go. We're back. Just had to refresh my page quickly. So, what I want to do is I want to summarize that for you visually very quickly. So, let me just zoom out a smidge. There we go. So, FSH and LH, right? So FSH and LH. FSH is going to cause a follicle to grow. So that's my follicle with my egg, right? Oh, let's move it down a bit. I don't know why my page is freezing. Oh, wait. I'm going to make my page swap around. There we go. That's much better. There's it. Technology, guys. So follicle stimulating hormone makes the follicle grow with the egg in it. The follicle produces estrogen. Okay. Now, this is where people are going to struggle. So pay attention. In order for the egg to get released, luteinizing hormone needs to come along. And so what happens is ovulation occurs. It's my egg leaving my follicle. Now, this then results in the egg needing somewhere to go, right? And where's that somewhere? The uterus. Okay, so this is the egg. This then leaves us with the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum secretes progesterone. Now, I just want to show you something. Each of these hormones have an impact on each other. Okay, stick with me. FSH and LH are like sister hormones. They have to work together. Okay, they have to work with one another. So in other words, they are cohesive with each other. They're not antagonistic. They work together. And so what that means is if FSH is rising and LH is rising, or they're high, right, then estrogen and progesterone would be low. And it's a simple reason. The simple reason is if I am making a follicle, I cannot already be pregnant. Do you see? I've got to decide. I'm either maintaining a pregnancy or I'm making an egg. I can't be doing both at the same time. And that's why these hormones have a negative feedback loop. One goes up, the other goes down. And it makes sense because if I'm stimulating a follicle to grow, that means this follicle I drew for you is going to go from being here to being bigger to being the biggest. And remember, as it grows, it makes estrogen. Now, when estrogen goes up, guess what goes down? Because we've just made a really big follicle. with an egg inside of it. Do we need to make another follicle, everybody? No, we don't. So FSH is going to go down. If FSH goes down, do we need to ovulate? No, we don't need to ovulate. So LH goes down. Now, if LH starts to get really low, progesterone is also going to go down and it's going to decrease. And if progesterone decreases, estrogen also decreases. And guess what? As estrogen and progesterone get low, 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 that then allows FSH to go back up again. And then LH to go back up again. And so that is why negative feedback is always compared to a seesaw. Your teacher might have spoken about this before. You have like a fixed point in the middle, and you have hormones going up on the one side and hormones going down on the other side. And it's this constant swing back and forth and back and forth. And so that means when FSH is on the up, something like progesterone is on the down. Because remember, if I'm making a follicle, can I be pregnant? No. And so if it was the opposite way, if we were up the other way, if I'm pregnant, so I've got high progesterone, I'm not going to make any more follicles because I need to be pregnant with one baby at a time. Okay. And that's actually that is the simplicity of it. And I actually think sometimes some of us spend too much time studying the menstrual cycle, not enough time studying other sections, and we end up a little bit shortchanged in our revision, and we don't revise anything else. So this is the main revision of the female reproductive system. Once again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat regarding female reproduction. Otherwise, we're going to go on to the eye and the ear. And just while some of you might be typing your questions, I also want to remind you that in your cheat sheet, right, you have a whole bunch of questions where I've actually walked you through how to answer them. And so, for example, we've got this section here on the hormones, on the graphs, how to answer the questions. I give you step by step, like what you need to say. And again, why is that in the study guide? It's in the study guide because you are using that to model all your future answers with, right? Again, people say, but there's only one practice question for the long and one for the shorter ones. Why are there not lots and lots? Because they are the same questions every year that they ask. They just change the scenario, but it's the same answers all the time. Okay, that's what I want to get to. So I'm going to wait a few more seconds for any more questions to pop up in the chat. Remember, I will be able to see them. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the eye. And I'm not going to do a crazy amount of structures in the eye because that's something that you would have to study without me. I'm going to waste time there. Instead, I'm going to focus on the things that you get wrong with the eye, and so that you don't make these same mistakes and you don't forget these important things. Okay. So you need to know all the names and all the functions of the structures of the eye. So I'm not going to cover those things. That's something that you need to do. But what I am going to do is I'm going to point out some mistakes that you make. The first mistake is, where is the cornea? Okay, the cornea. Many people misidentify the conjunctiva with the cornea. I want you to know that every point from here till here, that outer line, that thin black line, that is the cornea. Okay, that's the cornea. The cornea is transparent. The cornea is this bulgy bit in the front of your eye. That is not the conjunctiva. Okay? The conjunctiva is everything behind that. So it's still the thin black line, but it is behind the bulge. Okay? So let's not make that mistake. Another mistake that we make a lot is we cannot tell the difference between these structures suspending the lens. And I think it's because you confuse suspensory ligaments with the radial muscles, and then you confuse the ciliary body with the circular muscles, and there's just a lot of confusion there. Let's just make sure we understand what's what, okay? So first of all, let me just rub that out. First of all, these long filaments are the suspensory ligaments. And they are really important, as you might already know, because they change the shape of the lens. They make the lens fatter or thinner, which we will cover soon. Attached to that is this bulge of muscle, also known as the ciliary body. Not to be confused with the circular muscles. I know you're like, but how do people confuse that, ma'am? You trust me. People, ciliary and circular, people confuse the two together and they align them. That's not what we're looking at here, okay? Next thing that we struggle to identify and we confuse with, this inner yellow layer is the retina. That's where you have your rods and your cones to see color and in black and white or low light. And then this pink layer is the layer we often forget to study. That is the choroid. And the choroid is a vascular layer. It's got lots of blood vessels inside of it, okay? Then we have two important spots at the back here. Do you see this teeny tiny little indentation here? And then you see where the blood vessels and the nerve are leaving the eye. Those are 2 points that we often confuse with one another. The lower one is the blind spot. And again, not a lot of us know why it's the blind spot. So you know it's the blind spot, but why is it the blind spot, Matrix? Because a lot of people don't know why it's the blind spot. And you can be asked, why is it the blind spot? I'll tell you why. The blind spot has no rods and cones in it. And it is where the optic nerve leaves the eye. So no retinal light is captured there. Therefore, no vision is created there. It's a blind spot. And actually, we all have it right now. Looking at your computer, looking at your tablet right now, there's a blind spot there. There's a big spot of nothingness. But your brain fuses the image of each eye together over each other so that you don't have any blind spot in your vision. Now, that little indent above it, it depends on what your teacher has taught you. Most teachers go for the easier name, which is called the yellow spot. But in other textbooks, it is the fovea. Maybe you've heard of it as well. Maybe that's what your teacher calls it, the fovea. Maybe the maculae fovea. They're all actually the same thing, and they're all accepted as answers. So you can call it the yellow spot, or you can call it the fovea. It's basically, and why? Why is it the most important point? Because it contains the most cones and rods, meaning it's the vision, it's the highest point of visual acuity. I know, big word. It basically means the point at which you see the most clear in vision, right? Then we've got all the other structures here, like your lens and your iris, and I'm not going to go over those things because remember, those are things that you need to cover. Those are just the main things that I know that we get confused when we're labeling the diagram, okay? One other thing when it comes to labeling is I want you to take very special care when you look at the lens. So that's the lens. I want you to make sure that if there's more than one eye in the picture, they might ask you, what's wrong with this eye? And I want you to have your wits about you, and I want you to be able to look at the thickness of the lens. Is it fat? Is it skinny? I really need you to pause and take a moment and almost play spot the difference, because they love asking, like, what happened to this eye? Okay. So now let's get into the functions of the eye, because this is often a more frequent question. So we're going to zoom out of our eye, and we're going to zoom in here on the first function, or one of the more main functions of the eye, which is, of course, accommodation. Now, what exactly is accommodation? It's the lens changing shape so that we can create a nice focal point on our retina. Now I'm going to quickly stop because Brooke has asked a question. Please, can you clarify the vitreous and aqueous humor? I always confuse them. I know a lot of pupils struggle with the two. And I think the easiest way to remember the difference is the consistencies, right? And if you think about it, you've got the vitreous and you've got the aqueous. Vitreous, I want you to think of like viscous, which means like thick, okay? Thick. Aqueous, I want you to think more watery, all right? Now, let me put that knowledge into context. The vitreous humor, because I must also go slowly because then I will confuse the two and I don't want to confuse you. The vitreous humor, the thick like gel, that I can actually point it to you in this picture here. It sits in this space here between the lens and the retina. Okay, between those two spaces. And the aqueous sits in front of the lens and the cornea. So I want you to imagine there's like a liquid layer, a watery layer, and then a thick gel behind that. And maybe, Brooke, this will help you. The thicker the gel, so the gel inside your eye, so this is the vitreous and this is the aqueous, you want it to be a thick gel because you want the light to essentially, I don't want to get into too much physics, but it slows the light down a little bit. It refracts the light a bit more, refraction. And it's a good thing. That's a good thing for us to be able to see. And so the vitreous is behind the lens and the aqueous is in front. Okay. That's the easiest way that I can differentiate them. Other than that, you just got to remember aqueous in the front, vitreous in the back. That's it. Okay. Now, getting back to accommodation, that's what you're looking at here. You are looking at two eyes going through accommodation. And I think no matric should be spending more than 10 minutes revising accommodation. Honestly, you shouldn't be spending much of your time on accommodation. You should be learning the bullet pointed answer. Again, I know I keep talking about it, but the point of having my study guide and the cheat sheet is that's in here. In actual fact, these 2 pages probably summarize about 10 pages of your textbook, which is why it's so useful as a study guide. But if you look at the bottom on page 73, there's accommodation of the eye. And literally, it's 5 bullet points you need to learn. And if you learn the one, you just know the other, the opposite. So like if it contracts, it relaxes. If it gets thicker, it gets thinner. Why would you spend more than 10 minutes learning that off by heart? And you just need to know it off by heart. And so what you are actually doing when you learn accommodation is, you see, you want your highest point of acuity to land on the retina. Now, to do that, you need to change the shape of the lens. And look how the lens has changed shape between these two things. Far away, your lens needs to be skinny. And closer up, your lens needs to be fatter. And it's an obvious reason. It's a logical reason. Okay, let's do some logic here as well. When you are looking far away, you have a lot to look at. Yes, you're looking at a lot because there's a lot to take in far away. So your lens pulls flat to let less light. So I'm going to put here less light refracts. Because you've got you want less because there's so much light coming into the eye, right? It's coming into the eye. You've got so much detail to look at. It would overwhelm the eye. So you want the lens to pull tight, become flatter. And that means that your ciliary muscles, they relax, but the suspensory ligaments, those ones we pointed out earlier, they contract and they pull. And that allows the focal point to land on your retina. If that doesn't happen, we also need to talk about this. If that doesn't happen, then your focal point lands over here in front of the retina. which is what we call myopia. It's when the focal point is in front of the lens. The retina. Now let's look at a near point. In other words, you're looking at your book. When you look at a book, let's use your logic now. Think about it. Look how much detail. If you look at your hand, look how much detail you can see in your hand. The only reason why you can see all that detail is because your lens has gotten fatter, which allows more light to refract. Again, allowing it to fall on the retina. If your lens doesn't change shape, it stays skinny, okay? Then what happens is the focal point falls behind the retina in no man's land, in nothingness. It doesn't actually fall anywhere because remember, behind your eye is skull. So it falls in nowhereness. And that is hypermetropia. And that is where, and I'm going to draw it in here, that is where you would put in lenses. So if your focal point lands in front of the retina, which means you have myopia, you are going to wear concave lenses. What does a concave lens look like? Well, if this is the top and the bottom of the lens, it must arch in like that, concave, like that. If you are hypermetropic, so in other words, at the bottom here, the focal point falls beyond your retina, it means that you can see far away but not close up. Your lens must be convex. It must bulge outwards. Okay. And you can sometimes see that in people's glasses, right? Like I have close-up vision. So I've got myopia, which means I can't see nice in far away. I can't see detail far away. So my lenses are concave. But I'm sure you've noticed some people have that like extra window, that like extra piece of glass it looks like inside their glasses at the lower point down here. And that looks different. And it looks different because the lens is actually different. It bulges outwards if you actually look carefully. And that's because those people need bifocals. It means they need glasses to see far away and close up. And so that's how you fix those two problems, right? With the lens. Again, we cover this in the study guide. One last little thing, which I'm going to do on the eye before we move on to the ear, is this guy over here, which is the pupillary mechanism. Now, the pupillary mechanism is a danger one because we confuse it with accommodation. So you just need to make sure you know what these terms are and what all these things are. But remember, the pupillary mechanism is about allowing light in and out of the eye. As we just discovered, how much light that goes into your eye will determine how well you can see. So at night, you allow more light in, and during the day, you allow less light. If you allow too much light into the eye, as we just heard now, you can't see. You can't see clearly because your focal point doesn't like fall on the eye. If you will allow too little light, again, you can't see. So it's the same with the pupillary mechanism, except this time it has to do with the muscles of the iris and not the lens. So first things first, if we look at the first diagram here, this one says normal light. So it's somewhere in between light and dark. It's like a regular day. You're not looking into a bright light. The pupil is made out of two kinds of muscle. We have these, I'm going to change the color. We have these radial muscles that radiate outwards. I like to think of that because it's like, the sun radiating out. Okay, they go outwards. And then you've got the circular muscles, which go around the eye in a circle. Now, they work in opposite. So they're antagonistic. They work opposite. So when one contracts, the other relaxes, and vice versa. So, for example, in dim light, okay, in dim, which means dark, I like to think of the radials as being like a blind. Okay. And if you know anything about blind, what do? You pull on the little cable attached to the blind and it pulls up, right? And it allows more light into the eye. Well, that's how radial muscles work. When we want to make the pupil bigger and allow more light in, it is the radial that contract and the circular relaxes. Remember, it's always the opposite. But in strong light, so in bright light, we want to squeeze it down and want less light to come into the eye because it's too bright. It's going to damage the eye. So now what happens is the circular muscles contract. And the radial relax. And that's what allows the eye and the pupil, should I say, to either get bigger or smaller. One is contracting and the other is relaxing. And again, this is also summarized in the cheat sheet. You shouldn't be spending, again, another 10 minutes revising these 4 bullet points. The 4 bullet points being the memo answer every single time for this question. Again, that's how you productively use the cheat sheet. And it's the same for all the subjects, right? That's what the cheat sheet's all for. So any questions on the eye, you're more than welcome to pop them in. I'm going to zoom out now because we've done the female reproductive system, we've done the eye, and now I want to do the last little bit, which is on the ear. And it's going to be like a highlight reel of the ear, specifically the parts that we struggle the most with. So as I just get that picture into frame, I'm actually going to start off with this top picture. Actually, let's get close to this one. Again, before we begin, if you have any questions on the ear, just let me know, or on the eye as we go along in the chat. But again, remember, in the cheat sheet, you have a summary of everything you need to know. And I've made the ear so simple. Literally, I'm looking at it now. The ear has been summarized into 3 pages. I know your textbook is not 3 pages long on the ear, okay? And this is legitimately all you need to know. Everything else is not necessary. Everything else is extra, or in some cases, some textbooks are written long ago, and so they've got old information that's not relevant anymore. So I'm not going to go over the structures of the ear. That's for you to cover on your own. In other words, all the major structures like the pinna and the auditory canal and the oval window and the this and the, no, that's for you to go over. What I want to go over now with you is something that maybe you don't understand and that's a little bit iffy, and that has to do with balance and equilibrium and hearing, right? So what you're looking at in the diagram is the vestibular apparatus or the vestibular system. And I'm going to actually break it into the 3 main components. So we've got the cochlea at the back here, which is where we do hearing, right? That's where hearing happens. And I'm going to go over hearing soon. And then we have the vestibular apparatus, which is broken into 2 components, right? It is broken into the semicircular canals, and you have 3 of them. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. And you'll notice that they are in 3 planes. And that is because one is responsible for up and down movement, one is responsible for side to side, and the other one is for back and forward. Because remember, that's how you can move in 3 different planes: up and down, left and right, backwards and forwards. Okay, that's our semicircular canals. And then right at the bottom here, I'm just going to look for a better place to maybe ring this around. But sitting in this swollen area at the bottom here, it's not labeled, but I'm going to label it for you, is the utriculus and sacculus. Now, the utriculus and sacculus, they are there to tell you if you are upright or if you are lying down. So the utriculus and the sacculus. Okay. And so their function is to tell you where the body is in relation to gravity, basically. So in other words, is the body standing up or is it lying down? That's it. Not to be confused with the semicircular canals. They are telling you which direction the body is going in. So the 2 differences is this. The utricle and sacculus are to tell you where the head is in relation to the body. Is the head upright, like my pen? There's the head. Or is it lying down? Or even, is it upside down? So is the head below the body? So that's why you have 2. You have a utriculus and a sacculus. One for the body posture going vertically and the other going horizontally. The semicircular canals, you have 3 of them because you need to know which direction the head is moving, or the whole body actually is moving. Is it moving forward, backward? Is it moving up and down? always moving left and right. That's why you have 3. Now, you don't need to know all the intricacies of the different membranes and the this and the that. No, 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 no. All you need to know is the name of the sensory organs inside each of these. Now, the semicircular canals, right? The semicircular canals, they are going to contain your cristae. That is your sensory organ. It sits at the bottom of the loop, okay, which is actually what you can see in this picture down here. The utriculus and sacculus, that sensory organ is the maculae. And I can understand why many of us confuse all these words together because they're all like a little bit similar. But we do need to know these off by heart. So these are the 2 most important structures we need to know. Those are your receptors. They are the ones that are receiving information, telling the body and the brain where your head is and in what direction you're moving. And yet again, if we have the cheat sheet, I have a bullet pointed answer for you that A, you will learn off by heart, and B, you will write that if you are ever going to talk about balance and equilibrium. So which one is which? Let me remind you. Semicircular canals are all about your posture. So your cristae does your posture. And remember, your posture, oh, I beg your pardon. No, I beg your pardon. Rewind. I beg your pardon. Your semicircular canals, your semicircular canals are for your balance. Sorry, everyone. Balance. And that makes sense because if you're moving forward or backwards or left or right, you need to know, where's my balance? Okay, so balance is cristae. Your utriculus and sacculus, that is posture. And that makes more sense because if I say the word posture, I want you to think of sitting upright. Your brain wants to know if you are sitting upright or not. So that's why it's posture. Very simple thing. Once again, why are we spending huge amounts of time learning all of this detail when we can use the cheat sheet to learn the bullet points and apply it to the question? And the questions are always the same. Explain balance, explain posture, or describe balance, describe posture. And all teachers do is they make the questions negative sometimes. So they'll say, what happens if you didn't have any cristae? Well, then you wouldn't be able to maintain balance and you wouldn't be able to convert an impulse to be sent to the cerebellum, and the cerebellum wouldn't be able to send an impulse to the muscles. So you wouldn't be able to balance. Do you see what I'm getting at here? So if you know the fixed answer, you can always alter parts of it to answer the question successfully. Alrighty. So that is, in a nutshell, the ear and the major functions. So my top tip here is 1, know the names of the receptors. You do not need to know all the names of the membranes and the fluids and no. That's number 1. Number 2, know what they do. One maintains balance, one maintains posture. And my final tip is when you are writing out your long answer, it's like a paragraph, always end your answer with, and the muscles will maintain, and whatever it is, maintain balance or maintain posture, because it's all about the cerebellum, which remember is the back part of your brain, maintaining your balance or maintaining your posture. Okay. Now, to finish off our lesson, we've got a little bit of time left, is the cochlea, which is for hearing, which is this snail's shell structure at the back here. Now, I want you to know a couple of important things. Number 1, we must know what the oval and the round window are for. The oval window is where sound is going to enter into the cochlea from the eardrum. And it actually goes all the way around the snail shell. It gets to the end. Now, what we don't realize is that the snail shell is actually a double tube. It's a tunnel that has 2 like tunnels running next to it, where you can actually go around a corner and then come back out the same direction you came in, except this time you go out the round window. So you enter in the oval and you leave out the round. So let's actually zoom out a bit and look at that in a little bit more detail. So again, something we're not going to cover here, which is easy, is the pathway of sound, which is something you can learn off by heart. Sound waves travel from the pinna down the auditory canal. They then hit the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane converts sound waves into mechanical movement because the ossicles are knocking into each other from biggest to smallest down to the oval window, and the oval window generates a movement or a kinetic movement or energy in the lymph, the perilymph that fills the cochlea, and that generates impulse in the organ of Corti, and sound is heard. What I just did there, everybody, is what you have to be able to do without looking at your textbook, okay? And I'm not looking, I wasn't looking at that. That's all off the top of my head, and you need to be able to do that. That's the pathway of sound. But now let's take a quick breather, and let me show you things you don't need to know. So in my diagram here, we've actually got the ossicles, which are these three bones here. I'm sure they look familiar. And then we've got the end of the auditory canal. And we've got the oval window, which is where sound goes into the cochlea. And as I mentioned to you, the excess sound leaves via the round window. Now, all of the names of the membranes are not necessary. So the scalars, these names are not necessary. I don't know what your teachers have told you, but sometimes teachers want you to know it for your June exam or your mock. But I want you to know in the final exam, it's not needed. In the guideline, it's not needed. Okay. So let's take a quick breath, quick breather, and let me go what I did. Let me just do it again one more time about the pathway of sound, right? So what is hearing? If they say describe hearing, describe how we hear, we're going to say that the sound waves are going to travel down the canal against the tympanic membrane. Remember, the tympanic or the eardrum is here. The eardrum is going to convert sound waves into vibrations, into mechanical movement. Okay. That is then going to cause the ossicles, these three bones, to amplify. Very important, often forgotten. They amplify the sound. How do they do that? Well, they go from a really big bone down to a really teeny tiny bone. That's what amplification is. We always forget this point. So we amplify. That final bone, the stapes, right, the very last one, it knocks against the oval window. So I want you to think of it being a flat bone at the bottom like that. Here is the oval window, and it knocks into the oval window. That generates a wave, a pressure wave in the fluid that is inside the cochlea, and your sound travels through that top portion of the cochlea. And embedded in the cochlea, sitting here, is the most important receptor for hearing, which we must also know according to the guideline. This is the organ of Corti. And the organ of Corti takes those pressure waves and that blue liquid that you can see there, and it converts it into an electrical impulse. That electrical impulse is sent to the cerebrum, and it's interpreted as sound and hearing. Any excess sound waves are going to go around, as I said, turn a corner and go around back down the other side of the cochlea out of the round window. And that's where reverberation is prevented. A reverberation is an echo, everybody. It's so that sound only travels once through the cochlea. If it didn't, it would get stuck inside there. And what would happen is it would go around the corner, and then it would do this. And it would bounce backwards and forwards and come back the way it came from and bounce around. And it would get in the way, and you wouldn't be able to hear anything. It would be reverberating. And so As much as it feels difficult to answer these questions, you'll find that the content is easy to study. And you need to put in some hard hours to remember the content. What actually makes this section challenging is the questions that we get. But I'll tell you this much. If you simplify your studying so that you spend more time on past papers and less time worrying about details that don't matter, you will find that you'll get better marks because you have the knowledge. You just need to learn how to apply it. And again, my last little push for today, why you should all be looking for the cheat sheet, or why you should be using it as well as your guideline, is because I have taken out all the stuff that you don't need to know. And I've showed you how to apply it to sections. And it's the same, I've even got the mathematics one here off on my desk as well. It's the same with all of them, the mathematics, the physics. These books don't just tell you what you need to know. They tell you how you are going to be asked to use it. And I think that's a really big one for many of us. Now, I'm going to end the lesson there. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm not going to disappear just yet. If you have any more questions on this section, please put them in the comment section or in the chat. What I will do, and what I always do with members, is I answer you directly. So you leave a comment and I'll answer you directly of whatever you want to know that we didn't cover today that I can quickly answer. I will be having another live lesson during this exam period, so keep your eyes peeled for that next notification. And if you are a Rescue Me member, you should have access already to the cheat sheet study guide. If not, you would be able to find access to it under your perk info. So when you go to membership, and you're on the community page, if you click on that, the first blue heading says see perks info. And that, if you click on that, you'll be able to get access to the cheat sheet. Okay, everyone. But I think that's it for today. We've had a good lesson, covered many things, and good luck with your exams. And I will see you all again soon. Bye.